titled Policy Council Training. Talks about that what is listed in the Head Start Act of responsibilities for the Policy Council. So it talks about activities to support the active involvement in the operations of Head Start agency, the program recruitment, so how we get kids into the program. It's important for Policy Council to help us with the recruitment. If you know somebody that may qualify for our program, to ask them to come over to a roundup night or to fill out an application online, things like that. Also, one of the things we're gonna actually do tonight is go through our budget and application for funding. So we have to have Policy Council and board approval for those things. We look at our budgets and our expenditures, and we expect that Policy Council will help guide us in those things. And then we also have bylaws for the operation of Policy Council. We have some current bylaws, but we probably need to have on our radar to update those as we're working on our transition with ESU. We have program personnel policies and decisions regarding employment. For us, what we ask Policy Council to do is to come in and help us with interviews for staff. So if people are available and like to help with that, we would appreciate that. And then also including like helping us gather volunteers and maybe helping us with finding people to contract with, things like that. And then we also ask Policy Council to help us with our policies and procedures. And so recently, Policy Council just approved some new policies and procedures, again, as we transitioned into that, to the ESU umbrella. And then we also, if we would have, we don't right now have any delegate agencies, but if we would have delegate agencies, we would ask for assistance in how we provide governance to those delegate agencies. So that's kind of an overview of what it says in the Act that Policy Council helps us with. And then on the second page, it talks about an overview for a module that we'll try to go through tonight. So this is part of our eClick, and eClick provides us with a lot of information about ideas and ways to implement performance standards, and also some training information. And one of the things they just recently came out with, I was so excited because it was perfect timing, of training for Policy Council and board members. So that's part of our performance standards, that we have to provide training to Policy Council and board members. So it was great that they provided us with some information on that. So this just talks about the values and regulations and skills. We talked a little bit about how our governing body and Policy Council need to have information so that they can help support us in our program operations. So we're going to start going through this module, and I hope not to take too much time on this so that we can move on to our meeting, and I know it's cold and rainy out, and get everybody home. So in this overview, it kind of talks about different types of organizations that can oversee a Head Start. So in our state, I think we have, like in Cass County, we have a school district that oversees the Head Start grant. In Western Nebraska, it's a ESU, like what we're moving to. In the center part of Nebraska, it's like community action, like what you'd maybe see an NCAP doing in our area. Lancaster County, actually, I believe it is an NCAP agency. So a community action agency that maybe provides other services. When I think of NCAP in our community, they might be helping people with housing, helping people with budgeting, helping with services to families when they can't pay their bills, things like that. So it's all different kinds of organizations. There's even some faith-based organizations that might have a Head Start grant. In the performance standards, there's also special sections that talk about if it's on a reservation or a tribal area, there's different rulings, and so just a tribal nation might be operating a Head Start program. So we are under the Administration for Children and Families, which is part of the Health and Human Services branch of the government. A lot of people think that we operate under the Department of Education, and we don't. We do work really closely with them, and we have some rules that we follow with Nebraska Department of Education, but our funding comes from the Department of Health and Human Services. So I like to tell people that we're a Health and Human Services agency that happens to provide educational services, but that's where our funding comes, and our funding comes directly from the federal government. It's not funneled through the state like a lot of other programs. So we want your help and decisions, and your decisions matter in this group on the direction of our program and major decisions for our program. So I think of one thing in the past that's probably been a major decision that has changed the direction of our program is a few years ago we had an opportunity to apply for extra early Head Start money, and that provided us with an early Head Start at Golden Hills. It provided us with an early Head Start at Peter Sarpy and one at Bellevue West, along with some extra home-based slots. And if you don't know, our program at Bellevue West typically serves a lot of teen parents or pregnant parents that are teenagers, either going to Bellevue West, Bellevue East, Bryan High School, places like that. So that's I feel like a little different avenue for us, but it was important we had to have policy council support and the board support in order to apply for that grant and expand our services. I can't see. There we go. So this talks about the values, vision, and mission. So you'll get an understanding of what Head Start's about. We'll talk a little bit about history, starting with the Johnson administration, and then you'll have an opportunity to look at some timelines and things that's happened in Head Start along the way. So the history is, with President Johnson, he started a war on poverty in 1964, and he had this idea that there would be this project Head Start. And it kind of is comparable to what we look at in our community as the Jump Start program, or Bellevue Public Schools has a summer school program that's in June for kids that are entering kindergarten. So this program was just an 8-week program to help kids that were moving into kindergarten and get a head start before they got into the public school system. So that's how the idea started, and it's kind of grown from there. So here's 1965, and this actually launches the Head Start program. And in that 8-week summer program, they served 560,000 children. And at that time, we talked a little bit about how our funding came in. At the time, it was under the Office of Economic Development, which really seems strange, but that's where we started. So then we move ahead to 1970. And in 1970, there was they published a booklet about parents and parents' participation. So I really feel like in Head Start, parents have been very, very rooted in the program and policies and decision making. That's been a big important thing. And another important part with parents is that the expectation is that we're supposed to help grow parents and being leaders and advocates. We also grow parents. We've had several parents become employees. And as I go to different conferences, I have met people that have started as a parent, then maybe they were a teacher assistant, and then maybe they were a teacher, and then they just kept moving up until I met one gal that was the director of Los Angeles County Head Start, so they serve quite a population. They have a huge grant there, and she was the director, but she started as a parent in Head Start. All right, and then in 1974, it talks about the Community Services Act. When we receive our funding, we receive 80% of our funding to run that program, and the other 20% we're expected to get in kind, either services or donations. So when you come tonight, I had you sign that blue sheet, and that showed that you are volunteering for the program and helping provide services to the program. So that's part of our in-kind. Other ways we get in-kind is we have a lot of classrooms that are in school districts. So most of those spaces are provided at no charge to us. So we get to have in-kind for the space, in-kind for maintenance, for janitorial services, things like that. And that makes up a huge amount of our in-kind that we have to receive. Then in 1975, that was when they had their 10th anniversary with Head Start, and then they actually enacted what we live by, breathe by, is Head Start performance standards. So that was the first time that they really had a lot of guidelines initiated into how you were going to provide services to Head Start families. In 1980, they enacted that we had to provide services to children with disabilities. So we are required to have 10% of our enrollment come from children that have an IEP or an IFSP, and that means an individual educational plan or an individual family service plan. And that means that they meet verification with the school district to receive things like speech language services, physical therapy, maybe educational services, things like that. So that's a requirement of our program. In our area, we generally don't have an issue meeting our 10%. Part of that is because we operate with an Air Force base that is called an EFMPU base, and that's an Exceptional Family Members Program. And a lot of active duty members are transferred here if they have an exceptional family member, because we have good school districts and we have hospitals and doctors that can care for families that have any special need. And then that brings us to 1995. 95 was a big year because we got to see the first early Head Start awards going out. So prior to that, Head Start, it was only a Head Start operation. There wasn't services to pregnant women or anybody less than 3. And then they also came out with a lot of fatherhood initiatives. We know that fathers are an important part of a child's life and a part of our program. So that was an important piece there too. In 1998, there was some revisions to the Head Start performance standards, and then Congress also passed a Head Start Improvement Act. And I always feel like we always run a very fine line with, we can't advocate for political parties or for bills or things like that as employees, but we certainly can on our personal time. So we are always advocating for more money to be allocated to Head Start programs. So then in 2007, there was a School Readiness Act, and if you've been in our program before, I hope you've heard some talk about school readiness. Our goal is to make families and children ready for school, whatever that looks like. In our community, I feel like we have a lot of schools that are ready to receive children, no matter where they're at. So, but we still have a lot of goals around school readiness. So we also have a school readiness committee. So if anybody's interested in serving on a school readiness committee, we meet a few times a year. We look at child assessment data, if you like numbers, and talk about ways that we can improve our program and our services to have children ready for school. In 2011, Head Start came out with a designated renewal system. A lot of times, grantees that are in this DRS system, there's been a major issue with safety, a major issue with some financial things. So this was a way that they could weed out grantees that weren't doing as good of a job as what the performance standards have set out, and then provide grants in the areas with maybe a different grantee or make improvements to that grantee. We also had a framework that came out, and anybody that's already been through their family partnership with your either family advocate or home visitor, there's questions that you have been asked that are directly part of this framework. So you might have had questions about your bonding, which would fall under relationships between parents and children, or how you felt about your connections to people in the community or other Head Start family members. And then in 2016, I started here in 2006, and in 2006, they kept saying that there was going to be new performance standards. And every year we didn't receive new performance standards. And so I began to think that it was just a fairy tale. But finally, 10 years later, we received new performance standards. And these performance standards are very different than the performance standards we operated under previously. I feel like the goals are still the same, but our previous performance standards were more rigid. And these performance standards have expectations, but it's a little more open to interpretation of how your program and your community are going to implement those standards. So I feel like they've condensed them down. And then the other addition I feel like is our old performance standards really didn't have a lot of inclusion with early Head Start language. And so I think we're up to date now with early Head Start. So this just offers kind of a wrap up of what Head Start is. And then the other modules, I promise, are not as long. And I'm not going to make you take a test over it either. This next section just talks about laws and regulations. So there's a lot of legislative work around Head Start because it is a government program and there's government funding behind it. So this will just kind of help you maybe understand where those regulations kind of come from. So requirements as a leader, and then we consider Policy Council very much leaders in our program. We have a governing body or our board, and then there's Policy Council, and then there's management staff that oversee the day-to-day operations, where the governing body or board is responsible for legal and fiscal oversight, and then we want Policy Council to really guide the direction of our program. And I've made mention of these things. This is what our Head Start performance standards look like. Then there's a separate booklet that is just the act, Congress's act for Head Start. And then there's a final, I think the printed out binder is about this thick, and it's called Uniform Guidance, and that's all the regulations around how we spend money and what we can do with money. This section just talks about your team, and it kind of just reiterates that it takes all three groups, the management staff, the governing body, and the Policy Council, to make a Head Start work. And there's some overlap in the middle of what our jobs are, but we do have three distinct groups that help run our program. And this is just another view of that graphic. And I will and then this just talks about tools as part of Policy Council. So again, together with the governance, you're going to help set direction of the program. And then this is going to also talk about some goals and how it affects fiscal management. So this is our management wheel, and in your handout, there's a copy of this graphic, and it has on the outside your leadership and governance. So that includes Policy Council. And then the inner circle is the program management, planning, and oversight. And then inside that circle has different branches or different components. So like fiscal management is part of that. And then inside, what we want is we want quality child and family outcomes. So it takes all these things working together to produce quality outcomes. I think we're gonna go to, and then this final section is about being a leader. So this is just kind of an overview of some leadership skills, and I think that we have had some past policy council members and current policy council members that have really grown while they've been on policy council, and they may have started off really quiet and shy when they first came in, and now they're leaders in our community. So this is really a great opportunity. So some questions that are examples that might be included in part of decision making for policy council is, who are we going to hire for our next Head Start director? Does it make sense for us to expand our services to infants and toddlers? Is it possible to open a new center that would be closer to populations that we serve? How would we maintain full enrollment? Full enrollment is a big buzzword right now in Head Start. I also wear the hat for enrollment manager, and I never knew that it was an option to not be fully enrolled. So I'm rather surprised when I hear that there's Head Starts that aren't fully enrolled. The expectation is that you're fully enrolled and you have wait lists for people if someone drops out of the program. So this just talks about communication, and it's an important part of your leadership skills. Some people can be a consultation, and then you also want to identify gaps and barriers, and then and the inside and then the outside in. And I think we can click on each of these. So a consultation involves connecting, engaging with team members and identifying gaps in communication. And then identifying and addressing gaps with your team. Make sure that you have good communication and that you want the most effective outcomes. And then the final circle is that inside out, outside in. Keeping in mind that communication can be from the inside out and the outside in. When you communicate inside out, you can carry out information from the program to families, and then from the outside in, you're bringing in information. So one thing that we like to do as part of our meeting is to have people report out what's going on in their sites. So we like to do that, and then we also want policy council members to take the information out to the sites and report back to families. Okay. The only other thing that I have on this, there's some other handouts in your packet. There's an organizational chart, and this reflects our merger with ESU. There was that deal that we kind of talked about, and then we talked a little bit about that framework that drives our family partnerships. And then there's also outline in here about our Head Start early learning outcomes and framework. And that's what goes on in our classroom and through our home-based program. And then the final part of the handout is when you're a member of a board or an organization and you're having organized meetings, a good idea is to follow some type of order for the process of your meeting, and usually you think about Robert's rules of order. Although we're a relaxed group, there are some things that we do that have some maybe more rigid part of it, and that's like making a motion and passing motions. And so some people aren't familiar with that. So what I did is I found a little YouTube example that will give you some information. And again, they are way more formal than what we operate, but it'll at least give you an idea of how to make a motion and pass information through the council.